Good afternoon and welcome to this, our second in the series of webinars titled Beyond the Crisis, What Next? I'm Sarah Jackson, I'm the Head of Business Services at SFHA, and I'm really pleased to welcome back Chris Paton, the Managing Director of Quirk Solutions. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome, and it's great to have you. The recording of last week's session, including an introduction to Chris and all the slides, are available on the SFHA website. So today, Chris is going to go into further detail on some of the points he touched on last week. So thank you to everyone who completed the survey and helped shape the content of today's session. Before I pass over to Chris, just a couple of housekeeping announcements from me. We're going to split this session into 3 different segments. So those are going to look at decompression, the trust conundrum, and also team conflict. And then we're going to pause after each session just to allow everybody to get their questions in before we move on. So please do ask questions as we go. Chris will continue to answer as soon as he's able to. And then we're going to also encourage attendees to ask questions on air, and you'll have the option to turn your mic on and for you to participate directly with Chris. So you can use that if you have any specific examples that are bespoke to your organisation or your circumstances. And the same as last week, the chat function is still there, so you can use that if you want to share observations or thoughts with other attendees as we go. It's been working really well in other webinars, so if you can type and listen at the same time, I'd really encourage you to use it. So that's everything from me. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session. And now over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be back joining with you all again, and thanks for all the feedback on last week's session, which has helped me to understand better where you want to focus today. The way in which I'd like to run this next hour is to be as interactive with yourselves as possible. I can go through some thoughts on each of the 3 segments you've asked me to touch on, but if we're not careful, it'll just be a bit sterile with me giving my thoughts, and some of which might not apply to you. It might not apply to your particular association or to the individuals within it. Or you may have specific questions about specific types of individual and managing them. So by all means, please do respond with something in the question and answer box if you do have a specific question you'd like to ask me. And if you are feeling up for it, then it would be nice for us to be able to unmute your mic, which Karen will manage on our behalf, so that I can actually have a chat with somebody rather than just sitting here talking to my laptop camera. Let's kick off with the decompression element. So for those of you that weren't able to join us last week, the idea of decompression is it's a process, like a stepping stone, to help people go from a high pressure, high intensity environment to more of a normal and routine day-to-day environment. It's something that the military use an awful lot when we are coming out of combat and operation zones. So when I came out of one of my particular tours of duty, say for example in Afghanistan, we would pause at Cyprus for a few days and have this decompression period before we returned to our families and loved ones, so that we were a bit better adjusted than we would have been if we just literally got on a helicopter in Afghanistan and, still with dust all over us, suddenly landed at the other end and tried to absorb into our families. And it struck me as a useful simile for how the transition to our future ways of working might operate from where we are now. I think that a lot of you have got people either furloughed or working from home right now. And we can talk about managing those team frictions and team dynamics later on in the 3rd segment. But this decompression process is just a really useful way of starting to manage people from where they are right now, working from home, which will feel like a bastion. It will feel safe, it will feel secure, and somewhere that they're comfortable with, and that they've got into their own routines on. And now we're going to shift them back to coming into the office again, or being out on the road again and seeing tenants and inspecting properties. All of that moving around that will expose them in their own minds to a greater level of risk of infection and the concerns and the worries they will have about that. So it's this stepping stone between the 2. Now, there's lots of ways in which it can be set up. And I'm conscious that all of you will have slightly different organizations. So I'm not going to give you a, this is how you do decompression, because it will apply to some people, it won't apply to others, because it's all down to the people in the organization and your own people inside your associations as to the style and the program that you might run according to the people that you have. For some of you, if you have a relatively young population amongst your staff members, maybe you want to go for something a little bit more active and vibrant. If you've got quite empathetic and sensitive individuals, you maybe want to be a little bit more towards the human behavioral discussion sharing kind of approach. So there's lots of bits to take out from here. I think the only way in which I can really do it is to give you a whole bunch of ideas as to content you could put into a decompression period, and then you can pick and choose what you think is relevant, and indeed come back to me in the Q&A or in a chat with me as to how you might manage it specifically for your organization. Put me on the spot, maybe try and answer a question with no time to think or reflect, and I'll do my very best for you. So the first thing I think to think about with decompression is how long it might be. Is it something that you're going to do as a set period of time, say a one-day event, and you're going to cycle people through smaller groups of people through a one-day event, so maybe 10 each day as you go through, for example? Is it something that you want to do where you get everybody together, and so you have a very busy day? Is it something that you do over time, and it's kind of each session is maybe short and we drop in and do it bit by bit? My personal thoughts and advice would be to do the third one. I think that the more that you can make this a gradual process, the better. So there is nothing wrong with almost starting a sense of a decompression process whilst we're in the situation that we're in right now. Getting people involved and talking on meetings like this, but with everybody on the screen. So rather than a webinar, run it as a meeting so that everybody can see everybody else. And you can start some of those conversations around things that you found difficult, things that you've been surprised about, things that you've enjoyed, things that have developed, all these sorts of questions that are really important to get to address. And then when the tap is turned on a little bit from moving away from social distancing and we're allowed a degree of contact and mixing again, maybe it's a half-day session. Maybe it's a half-day session another week after that. So gradual, I think, and regular is probably better than kind of like this classic one-day offsite. Right, we're all in here, we're all going to learn. Now we're all right, aren't we? And move on. Allow people a bit of time to build with the process and grow with the process, I think, would be my first thought. In terms of how you structure it and what you do, I've already mentioned the fact that it's kind of dependent on the people that you have inside your organization. So the next thing I would suggest is actually get those people involved in what the day might look like and how they might structure it. You can offer them some ideas, almost like menu choices, if you like, and get them to pick and choose what they like. Maybe get them to vote on things they'd like to do, because some people may really fancy some sort of funny, silly, it's a knockout style event. Other people might just want to have a quiet barbecue. Other people might want to be even more reflective and just go for a walk somewhere. But I think that an element of the outdoors is always useful. When we're running our management courses and our leadership courses, obviously not now because they're all online and virtual, but when we're running them normally under normal conditions, we tend to go somewhere as a venue that has some outside space. So some sort of hotel or country house or whatever else it is that has some grounds, because it's amazing how just going for a wander as a group and allowing people to talk as a group can have a really significant positive impact. That just being outside and walking along, rather than being sat down and talked to or anything set up, kind of allow it to evolve naturally, if you like, as normal social intercourse would do. So that's about the design in the program. Maybe get people involved, get the teams involved. What would they like to see? What things would they like to do? So what would you give them to pick and choose from? Well, I mean, the limit is your imagination, to be honest. You can go off and do something, very well organized and almost run for you as some sort of activity. So nobody really is having to be part of the management team running the day. It's all being run for you. You can go off and do all sorts of these activities, quarry days, high adrenaline days, or experiences, falconry, anything you like. They think kind of like those red letter days experiences if you want to, but that might involve a bit too much money and you might not have the budget for that sort of thing. So then we can get into something that's a little bit more basic and pragmatic. So you could do just simple question and answer sessions where you write down a set of questions that you think will help stimulate the right sort of conversation amongst your team. So for example, one question could be something like, when were you at your lowest point over the last X number of weeks? What did you really enjoy about working from home? What has made you reflect on the differences you might like to see when we come back to work? How would you like to see us operate differently in the future? All these questions, they don't have to be management type of questions. They can be really simple. Just how are you feeling? When did you struggle? Why did you struggle? And what I do is I would almost get them written down on some little kind of like crib cards. Some little, you can put them down onto playing cards or anything else like that, just some little cards, and have a series of copies of them and have them almost random, like a deck of cards, literally. So you just almost spread them out and people pull one out. So they just got to ask that question there and then. So it's not necessarily what's the question that they want to ask or that's in their mind. It just starts to trigger things. And what you'll find is, as they are using those cards to stimulate something because it gives it a bit of structure and a bit of an agenda, they will naturally flow into the issues and the topics that have been important and relevant to them. So that kind of sharing experiences is really important. Maybe that's a little tip, using the cards as to how you can, and the questions as to how you can stimulate that. You can also do it as a treasure hunt. I've seen it done really successfully as a treasure hunt. So it's kind of like team activities, but really simple. So just a series of clues written down, maybe in poems or anything else like that, little rhyming couplets, which direct them around your building or around the area that you're in or whatever else it is. And each time they get to the next clue, there's some small treats for them, like some sweets or something like that, or whatever. But there's a question for them to share and discuss, a topic for them to discuss. So they've got a mixture of fun and activity without it being crazy. It's relatively easy to set up. It has some reward in the sweets, but there's also a purpose to it, which is when you get there, you have a topic and you need to talk about that topic, whatever the topic is, you want to define it. So, a treasure hunt can be a good way of doing it. Obviously, sport can really work simply because of the endorphins that it releases through the body and how it makes the body feel, to uplift the body a little bit and the psychology a little bit. People will feel a little bit better about it, but not everybody that you have working for you may be able to do sport or maybe want to do sport. So you have to think about that quite carefully, but a whole blend of different things. The final one I would offer to you, before Sarah and I have a chat, and hopefully you've got some comments as well, so please do start thinking about your comments or the questions you'd like to ask, is around a market stalls kind of setup. So you could set up different stalls that people can go and talk to and listen to and share with. So it kind of brings in personal choice as to where they want to go and where they feel they want to have, the different agendas. So you could have a market stall with a couple of people behind it around the future of the organization. You could have a market stall for health and well-being and mental health, and maybe you can get somebody in to help support with that, a psychotherapist or something like that, to help just basically guide and facilitate some of those conversations. And you can have different market stalls, so people can either kind of wander around it and feel like they can just go wherever they want. They can join in and listen to a conversation partway through between one of the stall holders and the people talking to them. So again, it's a really low threat, low pressure, unstructured methodology to it. So I think you want to have, to conclude, some sort of agenda to the activities you're going to do. You might do it over a prolonged period of time, but doing a half day, or even a couple of hours. So there is structure, but there's also individual choice. And there's also, most importantly, from my perspective, plenty of sharing going on and discussing backwards and forwards between them, that you can either initiate or stimulate with some little activities, but that they then run on from. Okay. So let's have a quick look at some of the questions. Karen, Devin, I wonder if I've got one in, I don't know if it's from yourself. When is the best time to start the process? We don't know when lockdown will end. So what part of the process can we do now? I mean, yeah, that to me is something, that as hopefully as I've just been highlighting, you can start with this sort of thing very, very soon. And the bit that I would start in terms of the process right now is those initial thoughts and sharing of how people have been feeling, what they've been doing, and just getting them to give a little bit of a rundown almost. You could ask me to say, so Chris, over the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, what have you been doing, and what's keeping you busy? What's been on your mind? What other activities you've been doing? What about the family? How have you engaged with that? And you almost get to do a like when the kids come back from school holidays, what I did in the holiday. You can almost start that sort of process first of all to give people updates as to what's been going on. I have been building a bar in my garden with my 20-year-old son. We've never done that sort of construction work together before. I've done lots of it, but he's never joined in, so it's been really nice. So I could talk about that, and all of a sudden I'm enthusiastic and I'm sharing and I'm giving a little bit. So that could be quite interesting. So I would start that sharing aspect. I would also potentially start the task of people thinking about what they would like to do as part of a decompression process, when they would like to do it, and throwing in some of their ideas. So that could be really useful. Okay, Karen, if you wouldn't mind opening up, I don't know first name, R. Wilson's microphone, so we can just hear from them about the question they've got around social distancing being gradually relaxed.
Hi, it's Rebecca Wilson here.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. Yeah, my question, I guess, is that if social distancing is relaxed gradually, we might find that some people back in the office, or we're sort of working on a kind of, some people are in whilst others aren't, and
Yep.
how we might facilitate decompression. It might take a long time to get to a full staff event, and that might be the goal, but it's just thinking, what might we do in the interim?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the point really, like around doing this in stages and doing frequent stages, because maybe an initial stage will be for those people who are going to be back in the office first, and then as we go on to the maybe 10 days, 2 weeks later, you run another session, and that one might involve the people that have been in the office already, plus some people who are going to be coming back, now. And so you gradually keep doing it until, it increases in size each time, but each time you're involving sort of everybody that's going to be coming forward and working through. I think the only thing you'd need to be careful to manage, you're right, it's not a straightforward answer to this. The way in which you need to balance those who are still at home and maybe even furloughed, because they'll be seeing this interaction and group happening for people who are coming back to it, but they're still getting nothing at all. So you've got to try and think about how you can engage everybody throughout the whole process and through those stages of the process. But I don't think there's ever going to be a really neat solution. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I think that's the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for your question. Did that help at all?
Yes, that was helpful. Yep.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Sarah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more of an observation or a question, Chris, but it was just around the sort of concept of leadership at this time, and you know, the things that we're potentially tasking our colleagues with around these big and tangible topics about what should we do and how should we approach the decompression process. I just wondered maybe what your thoughts were around the expectation that as leaders we should know, or we should have a plan, or we should have thought through the plan, and potentially how we might handle that with colleagues around providing that level of comfort through these periods of change, but also trying to make it an inclusive exercise as well.
I think I would expect the leaders and the senior leaders to have a plan about how they think they're going to do the transition, about which departments they think or individuals they think will come back regarding, you know, individual departments. So I think I would expect them to have a plan as to what the flow looks like, transitioning back to some sort of sense of normalcy. And I would expect the leaders to have an idea about what they think the world might look like when we get to the other side and how this might work. That's where I'd want leaders' focus to be. In terms of the decompression, I think that there's nothing wrong with a leader saying, do you know what, we've never actually done this before, because, well, I'd be surprised if many people other than myself have ever been through a process like this. You know, we've never really had a pandemic like this that has caused this much impact. So there's nothing wrong with saying, there is no rule book for this, we've never done it before, I don't have all the answers, and being that vulnerable leader and allowing them to guide that bit. So I think it's more important for people in the organisation to get a sense that the leadership understand what the compass heading is for the organisation as a whole. But in terms of decompression, everybody's happy to get involved. Everybody can design it. Everybody can give their thoughts in, because then it's going to be a lot more collaborative and consultative as we go forward.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Gail. Karen, I wonder if you could open up Gail Robertson's microphone so that she could ask her question about departments and decompression by departments.
Hello.
Hi, Gail.
Hiya. Yeah, I'm just conscious that we have some staff furloughed, some staff on probably a lesser workload, and some who I'm pretty much having to say you need to take holidays because they've been at it for 5 weeks straight, the people who are dealing with tenants and benefits and stuff. So I think I've got a different set of conversations depending on what the impact of this has been for them in their day-to-day lives.
Yes, and that's a very fair challenge. I think that you're right, instinctively thinking slightly on the hoof. I would be with you. I think I would go, and initial conversations would be from me with those different populations of individuals. So I would start to have a conversation probably now with those people who are furloughed around how they've been feeling and what they've been doing. I'd then start to have a conversation around, you know, with people who have been doing an amount of the work, but a lot less than they normally would do, and maybe a lot of it from home. And then a conversation with the third population is going to be different again, with those who have really felt the pressure and the intensity of the situation and are at risk, if you like, of feeling slightly burnt out. So definitely look at those three initially with different messages, different styles of communication, and different styles of leadership from yourselves. But I think that you're still going to have to, at some point, think about how you reintegrate those three populations, because that is going to have to happen at some point. And you all, unfortunately, have the most challenging type of situation where you've got some who will feel really run down and tired, and that nobody understands the pressure that they were under, some who feel a bit, you know, like, well, I was sort of there, sort of wasn't, I'm not really sure that I'm part of it. And then some who feel like frauds because they've been, you know, furloughed, but it's not necessarily anybody's fault or any reason why they're there. But that's how the psychology will be working of this, and trying to bring those three groups back together again will need thinking about through these group activities, and how you actually manage and run that, and what you do. I think personally, my focus would probably be initially on those who feel like they've been under the cosh and been working really hard, because we'll need to manage them quite carefully. The others will be wondering about how they come back, but they won't necessarily be feeling the stress and the pressure as much as the others. So once I've addressed and started to speak with the people who've been under the pressure and the stress, maybe asking them to think about volunteering to share their experiences and talk through their experiences with the rest of the group. Then you can start to bring that in online, and you can start to do that virtually if you wanted to, in different little conversation groups, just so that people get an idea about how it's been feeling, but also not forgetting that you also want the people who've been furloughed and the people who've been working from home to share how they've been feeling as well, because we don't want to end up with the people who've stayed at work being held up on some sort of pedestal as champions. Everybody needs to understand how everybody has felt up through this process. And even if it's somebody who's been furloughed saying, I feel awful because I've just been sat at home doing nothing. I know everybody else has been really busy, and that's made me feel really, really bad. And I feel, you know, like I've let the side down, and all the rest of it. Sharing that is just as important in a way. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yes, I'm just conscious that we're going to have different levels of engagement and disengagement, particularly with the people who've been furloughed. And I think you're right about it's almost like there's a scale of, you haven't done anything and these people have worked really, really hard.
Yeah.
And trying to bring that all back in together and work through those issues, that'll be quite challenging.
Yeah, and when we come on to the next bit, the next section around the trust conundrum, there's maybe ideas and the ways that you can use those people who are furloughed to give them some activities that will be of benefit to the organisation. But I'll come on to that in a little bit, and that will hopefully help make them feel that they've contributed as well, and for other people to recognise that they've contributed. But I'll come on to that in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks.
Craig, how about managing the decompression of your DLO subsidiary?
Absolutely, Chris. Yes, like many RSLs, we have our own subsidiary which has to stand on its own 2 feet. And these operatives have been effectively furloughed since the lockdown, and obviously it's critical for the success of the business that they get back to work as soon as it's safe to do so. So I just don't know how and when we could do some sort of decompression for these sort of colleagues.
Yeah, that's. I suppose it's quite a challenge, isn't it? Because it's the million-dollar question as to when this is all going to end, which none of us really know. If we knew that, or if we had any forewarning of it, it would be fantastic, and we could start to plot things in. But I was giving a webinar last Friday on this transition back to work with a fantastic speaker called Mel Fitzpatrick, and we went through some of the culture issues and the psychology issues of this. And we had somebody listening from Dubai, and they made the comment that they hadn't necessarily been planning anything in the way of transition yet, because, you know, why would you? It's still a long way off. And then literally the night before the webinar that I was talking about, Dubai suddenly lifted all restrictions and everybody was allowed to go out. So they had that sudden shock. And there's no, I guess, you know, you'd like to think that we will get some sort of foresight, some sort of idea of in 10 days' time we will do this, because that's what everybody will be craving. But having worked in Whitehall and been part of the Whitehall machine for 3 years, I wouldn't be surprised if actually we do get a bit of a sudden, and now you can do this overnight, and it's suddenly announced at one of the 5 o'clock press conferences. So given that context that we will be very uncertain about when this might happen, I suppose the only advice, I am thinking a bit on my feet here, Craig, so I might not answer your question particularly well, is to maybe try and get the subsidiary to run its own decompression process along the lines of everything I've just been saying. So start to get them to talk internally, just within themselves, about how they're getting on, what they're doing, whether, you know, sharing, etc. All the tips I've already offered. Because at least if they have done their own internal decompression, they'll be in a better place mentally when you want to then incorporate them back into your organization to become an essential part of what you do. And the other benefit of them doing it a little bit in advance themselves is that when you then bring them into your own decompression process, you can bring them in a bit faster and a bit harder than you would do if you were starting from scratch, because they've kind of already been through the process themselves internally. Does that help or make any sense at all?
Yes, it does, Chris. It's along the lines I've been thinking. They have been carrying out some informal chit-chat amongst themselves.
Right.
What I need to do is try to formalise that. And naturally, even if we did get sudden announcement from the government from the 7th of May, we're going to ease lockdown for construction maintenance, there's going to be a lag, as you would anticipate, because the rest of the sector's been shut down. So the supply chain will be taking a while to get back on the rails. So that's perhaps a period of time, maybe a week or so as well, that we can use. But certainly, yes, we need to start thinking now and having these conversations as you've suggested now. I'll get on to that. Thanks a lot,
Great.
Chris.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Thanks for your question and getting involved, Craig. That's not kind of like a nice little segue, I suppose, into the next segment, which is around this trust conundrum. And how do we allow people a degree of latitude to start to do activity, generate activity, but within which we still keep a degree of control. And I think I mentioned briefly last week around this concept of the Trinity, as we would use them, of intent, freedom in a framework, and closed loop communication. Okay, intent, freedom in a framework, and closed loop communication. This is a really useful way for you to get groups of people starting to do thinking and starting to be involved in thinking about the potential future of your organization, of your associations, of some of the issues that, I mean, take the issue that Craig's just raised there, which certainly I've had mentioned to me by other construction workers, and I think I mentioned it on last week's session as well, that when the tap is turned back on and you have this huge backlog of maintenance within all of your housing that you provide and that you manage, everybody is going to be after the same small population of tradespeople at the same time. Now, I know some of you may have your own dedicated maintenance teams and trade teams, but some of you may have suppliers, as Craig has just mentioned, contractors that you pull in. Well, if everybody wants that contractor all at the same time, because you're all trying to clear this backlog, we're going to suffer a real problem. So a way to address this is to get some of your people to start to work in teams now, looking at problems that you might face in the future and start to generate some ideas and some solutions to it. Okay, and we're talking about this freedom in a framework piece and the intent piece. So the best way to describe it, I suppose, is that the intent is a very simple, short statement. The intent statement is just literally something that says a synopsis of what you're trying to achieve, when you're trying to achieve it, the style in which you might want to do it in, and some of the objectives, if you like, the outcomes that you're looking for. So importantly, it's not saying how you're going to do it. It's just the what, all right? And generally, you look for, in that intent statement, just 100 words, no more. So people get really confused about mission statements and vision statements and values, and nobody really understands what they mean. And then we go and write them up, and we put them on big boards around our buildings, and people just walk past and thinking, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. So an intent statement is something that the military use all the time. Because essentially what we will do is, if we take all of the instructions that we've written, all of our plan, if we can boil that plan down to just 100 words, which gives people the compass heading we want them to go in, so we align our organization, that's what you're looking for. I don't really have an intent statement that's relevant to somebody like yourselves as housing associations. The ones that I've got are all a bit commercial. But essentially it is that, look, maybe put in the first sentence the objective you're looking to achieve. And this could be for a small project. So let's take that small project that we're thinking about here that Craig raised. The issue is, when we get beyond lockdown, we will have a real problem in terms of the amount of maintenance now to be done, the social distancing which might still be in place, and the availability of trades and of materials. So that is our problem that we want to look at. So for the intent statement, it might be something along the lines of, we want to, within, say, X many months after lockdown is finished, to have X% of our backlog of maintenance done. So there's the headline objective. Then you might want to put in something around the style in which you want to do that you basically want to do it carefully or steadily or within social distancing. Then you could put in something along the lines of which departments may or may not be involved. All right. So you essentially create an outline idea of where you're going, why you're doing it, but not, really importantly, not how you're going to do it. What you then do is you create these small teams. And within each team, what you can do is you can give them that intent, okay? So over here, we've got our intent, essentially, which is the what, okay? And then what we do is we say to our teams, right, okay, we're going to create a little high impact team, call it whatever you want. You can give them all sorts of names, tiger teams or anything you like, or that fits the sort of culture of your organization. And you say to them, right, so what we want is for, and you draw from your intent statement, this many percentage of our maintenance backlog done within this much time. Okay, that's just one criteria. You could then say to them something along the lines of a budget. Okay, we'll be willing to spend this much money and allocate this much money to this particular effort. Okay, then it might be that you want to just be careful. You don't want to cause mayhem and chaos. So you could say that you only want them to look at, I'm thinking furiously on my feet about things that might apply to housing associations, a certain geography to be looked at. Okay, so you're only going to look in this particular geographical area, not the whole of our association remit, just this specific geographical area. And to help you and support you, you could draw on advice from this many other people in teams from within our own organization, so from different departmental functions, okay? This shape can be whatever you want, whatever size you want, you know, it can be bigger and smaller. So maybe right now, you want to keep the parameters quite small, but in the future, as people get into this way of working, you can make it quite larger. It can be small for specific individuals or larger for other individuals. But the point is that inside this space, the teams are coming up with the how, okay? And they can explore the inside of all of this space between them as a team of 3 or 4 or whatever size team you want, as to how they can deliver what you've asked them to do, coming up with all sorts of ideas. And then clearly you could have other teams looking at other geographies. And you could have other teams maybe engaging with some of the contractors. So one of their sides could be, you know, we want that much backlog dealt with by this much time, that much money, but we want you to talk to contractors and suppliers that come in to do our maintenance for us. You can use this many people in the organization. You must stay within this type of social distancing. So you could take almost and pick a random social distancing rule that we don't yet know, but it's now allowing scenario planning to ongo, because again, inside here, they're coming up with the how. So this doesn't just generate ideas and innovative, creative ideas because people are thinking much more broadly and widely about what they might do and how they might go about it. You're creating ownership and accountability because the teams then have created their own plans. And when you say, I really like that and I want it to go ahead, they're much more keen to do it. But it's built that trust, because the level of parameter that you have given, the amount of money or the amount of homes or the geography or the amount of contracts they can talk to, whatever it is, represents the level of risk that you are comfortable with of something going wrong. And that's why this is called freedom in a framework, because the teams have to be free to make their own choices, their own decisions inside this space. So it's quite a clever technique, because you are not taking too many risks because you've defined the framework, but they feel like you've given them a huge amount of latitude and delegation, and they are now able to operate themselves and make decisions themselves as long as they're inside that framework. Okay, so that is the intent statement and the freedom in a framework approach. The third part of the Trinity that I mentioned is this closed loop communication. And that is essentially a check back mechanism for you to make sure that they're not going off somewhere completely haywire and heading for a complete disaster. Because even if it's a disaster that happens within the framework, you don't necessarily want it to be awful for them and to really demoralize them. Neither, though, do you want to retake control of their ideas and take things back, because then it's demoralizing for them and just as bad. So what we do is this closed loop communication, where we essentially sit down and have a conversation with everybody on the team. So what we do is, if you imagine this, and I'll try and do it again here. Here we have S, me, as the sender. Okay, and over here, forgive the drawing on the whiteboard as I'm going along, you have R as the responder, or your teams that you're going to. So to start off with, what we have is what's called the call out. Okay, so the call out is essentially your intent statement and the framework that you've given them, i.e. the freedoms that you're willing to let them go off and operate in. So they now understand what you want and the amount of latitude that they have to operate within. So then as the responder, you want to give them enough time to have a think about what you've told them and how they might answer it, but not too long, okay? Before they come back to you and they give you what's called the check back, okay? Or the feedback loop. If you give them too short an amount of time to think and reflect, they will just simply parrot fashion back to you what you've already told them about the intent and the framework. If you give them too long, they will inevitably create a plan, and they'll go too far down the plan, and now they are emotionally engaged in it, in their heart. And when you don't really want it to happen like that, and you're trying to steer them in a different direction, then it becomes really difficult because you've got that resistance. So it's a finely judged piece of string that I know you'll all want to say to me, how long is it? And I can't answer that question because it will come down to you individually as leaders and organizations within the cultures within your own organization. But just giving them long enough to do that before you then basically close the loop. Okay, so this is the closed loop bit here. All right, so you've got the call out, the check back, and the closed loop. Because what you can do, having listened to their initial ideas, is enter into a coaching type of conversation, a very open conversation with them, where you're saying to them open-ended questions like, I'm really interested in where you went with that. What else did you come along? You know, what did you consider along that route? Oh, that's interesting. So would you be developing that a little bit? Would we be looking at that as an option? Just asking them lots of questions, try and guide them a little bit if you can. If you can't, if they're absolutely stuck in their way and they're firm on their idea, and that idea sits within the framework that you set them, and more or less you can see will answer your intent statement if they get it right, you've got to let them run with it as a leader. Really difficult, because you can see the car crash coming but you've got to let them experience it, because it's only through them having that ownership and accountability of the design of it themselves, of running it themselves, of having the problem and having to fix it, because they will want to fix it because it's their plan. They own it, they created it, and they'll learn much more through that. And you develop their talent a lot more through that, because they are learning better skills and management skills than they would do if you just tell them what to do all the time. So that, more or less, is how I would answer the trust conundrum. Again, I'm very happy to take questions and thoughts on that, whether you think it's ridiculously simplistic, which essentially it is, but it works. Whether there are people in your organization that wouldn't like it, who just want to come to work every day and be told what to do, and they don't want to be doing thinking for themselves. But it's a way in which I was starting to think about how you could use some of the furloughed staff and some of the people who are maybe working from home to start to become these little tiger teams, to think about some problems for the future of your organizations and to get some ideas going, so that they then feel that they've been important and they haven't just been on furlough, because they can't generate any revenue for you while they're on furlough, but they can still do thinking and they can still do training. So let's have a look. Karen, I wonder if you'd mind opening up Carol Jardine's mic for you. There we go. Carol, would you like to just ask your question so I can grab a quick sip of water? You'll need to unmute your mic.
Have you got me?
Yes, I have
Okay.
now, Caroline. Thank you.
Hi there. We quite often have working groups within the organisation to look at a range of different things. So what you're talking about is akin to that, but I'm just wondering if we should exclude managers from these groups so that staff don't consistently look towards them for reassurance or defer to them all the time. Just that.
Yeah, no, the whole idea of this particular process is for it to be a team activity, and that the only involvement of the senior management has been to set the intent and to set those parameters within which we want people to go off and do those little working groups. Because you're quite right, otherwise you'll just draw in and go that way. I think I put up this book last week, but for those that didn't, I don't know how many of you have come across Matthew Syed's latest book, Rebel Ideas. I don't know, Caroline, have you come across that one yet?
I haven't, no.
Okay. So just within it, so maybe help answer the question as well. He talks about the fact about diverse thinking, and what we tend to do when we are doing these sorts of groups. I mean, I'm glad that you don't. It's refreshing to hear that you don't. But if this is the problem, so let's say that's the framework. Let's say that just happens to be the delegations and things that we've set up, whatever they may be. And we want some individuals to be in here to be thinking about it. You know, as diverse a group as we can make it, the better, because they all occupy different areas of that sort of thinking space, if you like. And the problem is, well, it's twofold. I'll do another quick drawing here. If we do another quick piece to the side, if we have another framework here, if everybody is in the senior leadership team, because we all tend to work for similar people and we recruit similar people and we promote similar people, over time our senior leadership team becomes all very similar in outlook and thinking. So although we've got lots of different people, we've actually only got one person thinking, because we're essentially all the same people. So now that's not the issue that you have, but you're right. If you were to put in either a manager here or some sort of member of the leadership team, or equally, if this person here is just a member of the team but is very, very dominant as an individual, all of these individuals will start to track towards them and to come to their own sort of understanding of and you end up exactly in the same situation as you do with this problem here, where everybody's occupying the same space. Yeah. So I would, hopefully to help answer the question, definitely not have management in there. I think management's job and the leadership's job is to define the frameworks, to define thing that you want solving, and then to allow a team to operate with it, but be careful within that team to make sure that it's diverse, that it represents all the different departments, not just a single department looking at a departmental function. Mix up the departments, get lots of different people from different departments into multi-functional, cross-functional teams. And if you do have a particularly dominant individual in there, maybe think about having a facilitator to guide it a little bit. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Thank you.
No problem. No problem at all. Thanks very much.
Thank
you. So no other questions on that bit? Okay, either that is so blindingly boring and obvious that you're all sitting there thinking, thanks very much, that's not taught me anything, or I've explained it really well and you're happy with the explanation I've given. So I suppose the last piece then is on this team conflict issue, just for the sort of last sort of 5 or 10 minutes or so, and managing team conflicts, which we spoke about at the outset. You know, it is going to be tricky because you will have these different populations of individuals. Thank you, Helen. Thank you for the feedback. It's always bizarre when you're just talking to a camera lens. Bringing together these different groups is going to be difficult as to how you go about it and how you do it. I think that there are different ways in which it can be achieved. Support networks are really interesting. I worked with an organisation, a commercial organisation. They were a software company, and so nothing to do with housing associations. But they were saying that the issue is that there's lots of underlying thoughts and feelings bubbling around, people that don't like a particular product or service or find it difficult working with certain people or whatever else it is. But they had no means of sharing that without it being quite confrontational. Now, one solution to that is obviously to have facilitated get-togethers and meetings where you are sharing with each other, but there's somebody like me or whoever you've got from whatever part of your organization or other organizations, or maybe you could facilitate for each other, you know, and get other members of other housing associations to come in and help facilitate. And you're just helping to run the conversation, keep it smooth, keep it on track, manage the odd little bit of friction that comes up. That's one of the first key ways to do it, is external facilitation. Because a bit like when our kids behave better or respond better to either, you know, friends of ours or, you know, our brothers and our sisters, so they behave better for Uncle Andy than they do for me. And it's because it's an external third party, essentially. It's nothing much more difficult than that. So maybe you want to look to bring in some sort of facilitation to help smooth that process. Somebody who understands how to run a process like that. Psychotherapists are particularly good in this particular sphere, but make sure you get one that knows what they're talking about and doesn't just give you all of the high-sounding words and actually is terrible on the day. But something along those lines. If it's not that, then this software company created an avatar, essentially. The company was called Babel, and they created Babel Bill. And it was a little drawing of a little person, and Babel Bill was somebody that you could suggest ideas to as to how you think the business could improve and the organization could improve. It was somebody that you could make suggestions to for a social event if you wanted to do that. It was somebody who you could say to, I'm really struggling with this particular part of a task I've been set because I don't know where to find the answer. And because it could be done anonymously, it meant that these questions just kind of sat there anonymously, and Bill gave answers, or Bill was the conduit for answers to be given. So what they were finding was that as they started to engage with it more and more on this online platform, which was really easy to set up, it's not a complicated or costly thing to set up. It's just a simple message exchange portal. I'm sure lots of you already have something like this. When somebody posed a question saying, I don't really know where to find the answer to this, I don't really know how to go about it, because it's anonymous, they don't feel the pressure of sticking their hand up publicly. But somebody else was coming in, looking down through the messages and going, oh, I know where that is. and they rattle in an answer. And so now it's basically Bill, or whoever it is, this avatar that you want to create for your association, starts to help and enable those conversations. And I was thinking about, and I don't know whether it will or it won't help, but something like that for yourselves in terms of bringing back and managing these team conflicts as people come back together, so that different individuals can share their thoughts in an online format. Because my view, if you like, is that society is changing. And whereas I could sit down and say, we want to get people in a room sharing and sitting down from one of their face-to-face with some little magic cards that gives them a question and they have to be triggered to answer it and talk about it. That's great, but people still get uncomfortable about it. The new younger generation and the next generation leaders that are coming in are more comfortable being a bit behind a keyboard. That's just the demographic and how we are. So why not work with the grain? Why not use that to your advantage? And if we create this avatar so that people can then anonymously from behind their keyboard share a thought or a concern that they have or how they feel about it, when they see 2 or 3 other people respond saying, don't worry about it, I also felt like that, then they don't feel isolated. They don't feel like it's just them. And also the whole organization, while they don't know who that individual is beginning to get an understanding of where people are in this space at this point in time. So having had the question or the challenge posed me, if you like, from last week, I've been trying to think about ways in which you can put that together, those support networks, but also quite simply just regular check-ins. If you are going to have a meeting, let's say it's completely normal. This is pre-whole COVID thing, so we're pre-March the 1st. If you are going to have a team meeting of some sort, and you know that one of the team is always difficult and a bit fractious and a bit awkward to deal with and a bit disruptive within the meeting, you already have an idea in your head about how you want to manage the meeting and manage that individual as they come back in. And nearly always the start of the meeting, you will be quite fast-paced in how you do that intervention to kind of ease people into it and ease people into the start of the conversation to make it a positive thing. Much the same thing with doing the reintegration and through that decompression process and back to work process. You as the leaders are going to have to be thinking about really quite regular check-ins, updates, getting around, seeing people. I would suggest that actually at this point in time, your main role is to make sure that the organization is coherent and is functioning well, and you're not as worried about the future strategy direction of the organization or of the association. I know that might sound like a complete anathema to some of you. You'll be thinking, well, no, surely it's my job to be horizon scanning and thinking about the future. I think that often as senior leadership, our job is to try and have a bit of a foot in both camps. We need to be doing that horizon scanning, but we also need to be very aware of how the organization is functioning, how the association is functioning at this point in time, and is it functioning effectively? And if I have to drop down to only being 20% future-based and 80% current-based, then for a time and a period, I think that's probably a worthwhile way to be. Okay, that brings me to the end of my part of this. We've got a couple of minutes spare for Sarah to either wrap up or for any final questions that people want to ask to come in on that piece around managing team conflict.
It doesn't look like any more questions on that, but yeah, definitely don't take that as a sign of boredom, Chris, and more just a very comprehensive summary. So that was an excellent session again, and thank you for responding so quickly to our feedback from last week, and also providing very clear, specific examples on how we might apply some of the processes that you spoke about. So thank you, Chris, that was great. And if you'd like to connect with Chris directly, his contact details will be made available along with the recording of today's sessions and also the slides, although they weren't slides. So I don't think anyone wants to see your drawings, Chris. With the greatest respect, I think
definitely not an artist. Definitely not an artist.
In the most recent Twitter poll that we tested with members, over 50% indicated that returning to business as usual was the biggest challenge that they face. So I indicated at the beginning of this session that these are a series of webinars focusing on what next and supporting members to reimagine what business as usual might look like. So if you have any suggestions about particular topics, please do get in touch as we design it behind the scenes. And a list of all the SFHA webinars is on our What's On page, and we're adding new dates every day. So thanks very much again to Chris. Thank you to everybody who spoke on the mic, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, folks. Take care. Stay safe.